Good evening. Today is Thursday, March the 7th, 2019, and I now call this Fairfield City School District regular work session to order. The first thing we need to do is appoint a treasurer pro tem. So at this time, I will entertain any nominations.
I nominate Mr. Begley.
Second.
So Mr. Hare nominated Mr. Begley and Mrs. Shorter seconded. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll call the roll. Mr. Hare?
Yes.
Mrs. Shorter?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Neill?
Yes.
Mr. Birding? Yes. Okay, Mr. Bigley, will you call the roll for the meeting, please?
I will. Mr. Birding,
Present?
Mr. Hare,
Present.
Mrs. O'Neill,
Here?
Mrs. Shorter,
Here.
and Mr. Bagley is here.
Great. Mrs. O'Neill, will you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Neill. All right, presentations and resolutions, Mr. Smith?
All right, Mr. Birding and members of the board, we have multiple presentations scheduled this evening. Our first presentation is recognizing our freshman school for receiving the 2018 Momentum Award. So at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Berkmeyer, our principal at our freshman school, to come forward. The Momentum Award is the State Board of Education's way of recognizing schools that received A's on every value-added measure included on the Ohio school report cards. And this evening, I'd like to share some direct quotes from the State Board of Education. Fairfield Freshman School's report card shows your school is committed to its student success by ensuring students exceeded the growth expectation in English, language arts, and mathematics. I also congratulate you on recruiting and motivating the high-quality leaders and staff needed to make this happen. I want you to know how much we appreciate your leadership and the dedication your team has to providing a high-quality experience for all students. Please share our gratitude with all of those who contributed to this accomplishment. This evening, very proud to recognize Mr. Berkmeyer and all of the staff at Fairfield Freshman School for all that they do for their students and our school district. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Berkmeyer.
I feel like that deserves like that's a big deal.
No, absolutely. It's a tremendous honor. We're very excited, once again, our staff and everyone involved. I want to thank our board, our district leadership team. The decisions that everyone makes obviously has a direct impact on what we're able to do within the buildings. Thank the parents and students. We have terrific parents every year at the freshman school. Students work extremely hard. Obviously, they're the ones taking the assessments and are highly motivated to achieve at the highest level. Finally, the staff. We know those are the workhorses in the classroom that are the ones delivering the content, the ones building relationships with our students, and we just very thankful to have a tremendous staff at the freshman school to be able to achieve this 2 years in a row. When you look at what they're asking us to do, to get an A with our gifted students, as well as an A with our lowest 20%, as well as an A with our students with disabilities. In many situations, we have teachers that have the advanced accelerated classes as well as our inclusion classes. That same teacher is able to motivate and teach across all levels. And it says a lot about, as I go back to number one, delivery of the content, knowledge of the content, but also that relationship piece to be able to motivate students that are naturally motivated to come to school, as well as students that maybe struggle with that motivation. So again, we're tremendously excited. Appreciate everything the district has done to support the freshman building and all our buildings, but we're very thankful. Thank you.
Comments from the board?
I just want to congratulate you. To have this award 2 years in a row is amazing, an amazing accomplishment. And I would just kind of echo some of those comments from, I believe it was a state, just to share our gratitude with the rest of the staff for all. That's a lot of hard work day in and day out. So I just thank everybody that's involved in achieving that level of success.
As you said, there's lots of parts that make this work. Certainly leadership in the building, but the staff, and that includes everyone, and most of all, students, because it's through their hard work that's focused that got us here, so.
I would like to say congratulations. I mean, the freshman building is unique. It's a special little place, and we are very, very happy with the work that you guys have done. 2 years in a row, that says a lot. Congratulations.
2 years in a row is a tremendous feat. My daughter is there this year, so hopefully she's doing her part to make it 3 years.
Well done, well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation is a middle school advisory program update. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Franchini and Mr. Main, and I will allow them to introduce any visitors that they brought with them this evening. It looks like they have brought quite a few.
We like to bring friends. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for letting us talk to you a little bit about our advisory program tonight. In regards to, is our presentation back there? Thanks, Mr. Smith. Go ahead, Dave. You want to chat? It's not up here yet.
Well, the good news is I'm not going to talk long because I don't sound very good. But as we get this together, as you guys are well aware, we are very happy to embark on the second year of advisory. You guys heard from us back in the fall. Obviously very excited about some of the data results. We're going to share some more data. We're going to give you some ideas and some feedback that we've had from our teachers. And obviously the most exciting part, well, we've got 5 students over here who are not nervous at all to share their experiences. And as Ms. Franchini gets this together, here we go. We'll have a moment to kind of hear from them. We're going to hear a little bit about where the program was maybe a couple of years ago, what it looked like in the building a year ago, what it looks like now after having about 3/4 of a year to implement many of the ideas. And then we're going to get an idea of maybe the feedback from our students of where they'd like to see it go next year. And we'll take all that information and continue to add to it as we go. All right. Was that long enough for us?
So if you remember, about 5 years ago, the district put together a committee and said, we're going to have 2 middle schools. What do we need to do? What does that look like to go from one building of 1,600 7th and 8th graders to 2 buildings of 1,200 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? And very important in part of that conversation was this advisory program. What does it look like? What's the content? And the focus of that really was to build relationships with kids. So as Mr. Berkemeyer mentioned in regards to his Momentum Award, that's something that's really important because if we don't have relationships with kids, we're not going to make our academic growth. So the advisory program, the goal of that is really to take that time to build relationships with kids, make sure they have a connection in the building. 2017 and 2018 was the first year that we had 2 middle schools, and that was also the first year that we had an advisory program. The first year, we figured out that maybe once a week wasn't the greatest plan, but it was a start. And so we looked at it and we said, based on feedback from both staff and students, once a week is not enough. I don't feel connected. I'm not getting really what I need from this. So we made some changes based on our student and staff recommendations, and this year it is an everyday 15-minute in the morning, first thing when the kids walk in, so they can touch base with that teacher. There's no academic judgment there. It's really just, hey, how was your day? They can do some activities with each other, which I'm sure you'll hear a little bit about from them. But I'm going to turn it over so they can let you kind of know where we are now. I may have stolen some thunder. Sorry, Ms. Park.
That's okay. So Miss Fran, I'm not gonna do that. All right. So Miss Franchini kind of talked about where we are now, and so it is daily. It is 15 minutes every morning. It's where the students go first thing, and so it's a great place for them to kind of start their day. You know, we have a really early start in the middle school, and so I think it gives them this time to also like get energized and get warmed up for their day versus going straight into an academic subject. The topics were developed by an advisory committee and by students in advisory, and it's also, you see it very commonly shared out where teachers will find a video or find an activity and email it out to the staff and say like something to use for your advisory. And so that's also great to see our teachers and staff collaborating. Staff members also use it as a good time to check in with students about their grades, to maybe remind them about upcoming tests or major assignments. So it's just that other piece. And we also have the live school program at school, which I know we've talked to you about before. It's one of our behavior supports. And so they also use that time to check in about the live school positive points that the students are earning, or maybe some of the demerits they may have earned, and kind of reflect on that. And there are some monthly themes that we work through as well. So Ms. Delaney is going to talk about some of the data that we've collected.
So we give our students a survey to get their feedback on how things are going, and there's a couple pictures over there of some activities that go on during advisory. So some of the feedback we got during the survey, students love watching videos. There's a lot of focus on self-improvement and self-regulation, and so they also say their favorite part about advisory is their teacher. Again, we really focus on them building that relationship. They stay with the same adult through their 6th, 7th, and 8th grade year, so they really get to develop a strong relationship with that person, and that they really do enjoy the activities. Like Ms. Parker mentioned, a lot of our activities are shared, and a lot of activity ideas come from the students, so if there's something that they're interested in, they get to explore that with their advisory teacher. So 86% of our students reported that the time spent in advisory was meaningful to them. 87% of our students reported feeling connected to other students in their advisory class, and 97% of our students surveyed reported feeling cared about by their advisory teacher, and we were very excited to hear that.
All right, so now the real stars of the show. So what we're going to have is Olivia Gillian from Crossroads Middle School is going to come up, and she's going to share a little, oh no, I'm sorry, Alyssa's going first, right? Alyssa Wells is going to come up first, and she's going to share with us what it used to look like, her first year of advisory, which was last year, and then she might give us a little story of what has happened this year. Come on up.
Last year was my first experience with advisory. Unfortunately, it was only 20 minutes every week, which made it extremely difficult to get to know people and grow relationships. We didn't have the time to talk about the real issues and the no-pressure situations that we could. We didn't get the opportunities to get to know each other. Although last year was difficult due to the time constraint, I can clearly see the potential for advisory to become a great thing. A typical day in my advisory class this year would be spent like any other day, going through a PowerPoint provided by our school's counselors to help guide us and to learn about the important topics like bullying and gun violence. We had discussions prompted by the interactive presentations. Having advisory every day gives me the opportunity to get to know the students in my class and find similarities that we share that I otherwise never would have known. Thank you.
And at this time, we're going to have Sarah Wallace come on up. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about what it looks like today.
Advisory this year is a time of connecting with students and teachers, and although it is only 15 minutes, it is a time to connect and catch up on world issues / current events. We spend the short time we have getting to know everyone around us and like what's going on during the school. So an experience I've had in advisory is more a specific story than Alyssa. It is when our school decides we like to have decorations in our hallways, so we decided on door decorating. And our classroom made a competition out of each of the tables to see who could have the best decoration on their door. And we decided that whoever would get the best, or figure out the best theme, would get donuts, and everybody likes donuts, so. Yeah.
All right, and then finally, we're going to hear from Olivia. She's going to share with us a little bit about where she'd like to see advisory goes to maybe next year.
Okay, so like Mr. Main said, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what the future of advisory looks like. We said we would like to see advisory maybe be a little bit longer. This year it's only about 15 minutes, and that's not a lot of time for a class. We can't get a lot of activities done in that 15-minute window, even though it is every day. We want it to be a little bit longer so that way we can connect with our teachers and our students more. We've been with them for 2 years, and we're going to be, the grades below us are going to be with them for more years to come, and we would love for them to be able to connect with each other more throughout their middle school years. Advisory being longer would also give them more time to organize themselves before their crazy days begin, which is something that is pretty important as they go throughout their middle school years. I know personally it can be pretty crazy. If you're absent, getting all your work caught up, advisory can be a great time to know what you're missing and figure all of that out and get it in. And lastly, having a longer advisory would be a great way for students to just know how to be connected to the world around them, just by the activities that we do with each other. Now, my experience with advisory happened last year, actually. Last year I had a pretty severe concussion, and I was out for a long time, and then when I came back, I was doing half days. And I had a lot of makeup work, and my grades were not great from all of the missing work. But advisory gave me the opportunity to see what grades and what assignments I had missing and what I didn't have, so I could get that turned in and get all of my grades caught up to be where I wanted to be and where I knew I needed to be for my grades and for my schoolwork. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, perfect. Okay, and now I'm going to call up Aiden Harbon and Elizabeth Anderson from Creekside, and they are going to share some of their experiences. So, all right, I think Elizabeth is going to go first. Elizabeth, Lizzie.
I really like advisory because it helps me with my grades and how to keep myself organized. With Miss Talk, she tells us about our grades and how, if we're failing, how to bring them up, like study for our test and do all the extra credit that we're given. With life school, she will go over with us on how many negative demerits we have and keep us in check so it doesn't increase and turn into detention. Miss Talk, she's a good teacher because she helps us connect with people and how to work together on how to make our day not start with a downtime. And we do different activities, we did tic-tac-toe with Miss Bauman, another advisory teacher, and we decorate doors, and they never turn out good, but she never cares, but it's okay. And we do talk box where we each put anything we want to talk about and give our opinion about it. It could be something serious or something stupid, like what's our favorite Pop-Tart, which I never choose. And during December, since we only have really 2 weeks, I guess, in the whole month, and we would do dumb things, we went Christmas caroling, and it was not good. Okay. And we would go around, tell jokes to different teachers, and did a big feud on go against each other, see who was better. We did rock paper scissors, and then a breezeway, you would say, we did tic-tac-toe, and it was kind of weird because it was on the ground. And with when she's not there, we'll have subs, and it would still be fun because we do like crossword puzzles. Like during December, we'll do one about Halloween, which would have made sense to anyone. And then she would show us different video clips of like marble races and like how to make snow into ice cream, and do like cards where it would like turn into like different things that would pop up. And for advisory being 15 minutes only, I feel like it doesn't really help, but it could help if it like was more time, like 30 minutes long, because if we had 30 minutes long, we could talk more and like wake up faster in that class when we are fully ready for our day to get started and not feel like it's gonna dread. And with that class not having to worry about having a grade in it, it also makes people feel like we can relax for the first 15 minutes and get our homework done and just like study for our tests that we might have that day. And thank you.
Hello? Okay, that works. Yeah, she pretty much covered like most of what we do in advisory, but it's a very good time for me. I'll be honest with you, when I first heard about this whole advisory thing, I'm like, this is a bad idea. I don't know, I didn't like the idea of like being put into like almost forcing friends, but when I actually got into it, especially this year when we had every single day seeing the same faces, you really did kind of sense like a group of like community. And I have become friends with people who I never expect to become friends with. People that, I mean, they're kind of like different social groups than me, but I'm so glad I've become friends with them. And it's really nice for me because as being like part of Visions, which I've been in the same class with the same 25 people for like the past 4 years. Definitely not 40, but the same 4 years, so it's given me a sense of branching out, and I also hope that I get to stay with these people for the next 4 years of high school. But yeah, Miss Talk, she's a wonderful advisory teacher. I think the epitome of what an advisory teacher should be. She's someone who's never been forceful about anything, but just completely relaxed, but also there for you. She's someone that you can feel that you can talk to, but she would never force it on you, which I think is perfect. She's gotten me involved with stuff outside of school, such as wildlife, such as track, and we've just gotten a really good connection. And even just friends, like in that class. We've gotten inside jokes that laugh about so many things. Like, I remember last year I would do my homework almost every day in advisory. Sorry, Mom, but I would. And so my friend Jacob, he would just like say, "Oh, you're doing your homework again, Aiden." But yeah, we have inside jokes. We just have a good time. And like Lizzie said, we do some wild things. And caroling, that's tacky, but we love it. And we become greater friends and just have a good time. And I think that's exactly what advisory should be about.
All right, amazing. A couple more things just to kind of let you guys know where we're going. And a couple of slides or a couple of comments or bullet points. Obviously looking for new activities, new themes. I think caroling is going to be at the top, you know. Tacky, I heard that word. So, again, looking for additional resources. I've talked to Mr. Smith about some skills for adolescents, programs, stuff like that. Also coming up with weekly themes or phrases or comments or quotes. Maybe even finding a grade level coach that can go around and help, you know, spread the ideas and the resources. So we are constantly thinking of ideas, and we are very confident that it'll continue to evolve and serve our students quite well. We thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that I heard this evening was the business about making connections. And really, when you look at the school day, how much time do you have to build relations? I mean, you're in a classroom focused on doing something, you go to lunch, you're focused on doing something, but how much time do you really have to build relationships? And to be successful in the world, especially the world of work. You need to be able to make connections with diverse people, and you need to be able to build relationships so that you can get along and work towards a common mission. So it's probably the most valuable thing that I've heard this evening.
Any comments?
I'm just very impressed with you all. Just listening to, basically you guys sharing your perspective, it sounds like those soft skills that are so important are a vital part of this program, and that's really, really good. Sometimes we don't always think about that because we have so much to do. You guys, the teachers, have so much to do. But this is important, and I'm so impressed with what's happening. I'm so impressed with how you guys communicated and talked about the program and had your thoughts about how to improve it. I'm really just thrilled. Thank you.
Yeah, she's absolutely right. You all did a wonderful job speaking. My concern with advisory early on is that it would just be 15 minutes of study hall, or last year 20 minutes of looking at your phone, and I don't want that. I want it to be about engagement, as Mr. Hare alluded to. I think that's the value. So whether an event like Christmas caroling is successful or not, it's successful in the point of engagement, involvement, speaking in front of others, all of those things. There's where the growth comes from. So you all talked about expanding it. I don't know if that's something that we'll be able to consider and do, but if that's what's accomplished, then we're getting something out of this, then it would be something to consider, because there is true value in that, as they alluded to. My other concern was, would there be enough topics on a day-to-day basis to occupy your time, and whether it's world affairs or coaching, weekly themes or any of those things, having an advisory coach, all those things would be great. So I'm glad to see we're thinking and the wheels are turning and continue to evolve with that as well. Great job.
Thank you guys for coming tonight and speaking. You all did an amazing job, and it's great to hear your individual stories. I have kids that are not too far off from your age, and some of those soft skills, like Mrs. Shorter said, it's hard to squeeze in time to teach those. I think two of you talked about learning how to organize your day or help keeping on track with like projects you missed or when you were out with your concussion. And so I'm thankful that there's time to teach some of those soft skills, or teach how to organize yourself, or teach how to keep up on that. Otherwise, it can be easy to fall behind, so I'm thankful for that. I'm also thankful, I think Mr. Harbaum said, that he wasn't quite sure how he felt about it first, and it was going to be a waste of time. And sometimes when you try something, we don't know either if it's going to work, but the idea sounds good, and we have hesitancies just like you have hesitancies, and so it's good for your mind to be changed and see the value in it. And we've definitely made adjustments over the first year, the second year, and I'm sure there'll be adjustments going forward. But I would thank all of you whenever there's something new to kind of go in with it with as optimistic outlook as you can, and be willing for it to affect you in a positive way. So I'm glad that it did. I think the most important thing that stood out to me was one of the quotes. It said 97% of the students feel cared about by their advisory teacher, and that's makes me just want to lay my head down and go to bed. That's the most important thing, is to build those connections at that age. And so the fact that 97%, that's a huge, I wouldn't even expect it. I wouldn't even dream that it would be that high. So I'm super, super happy that that's the results that it's getting. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. It's always a pleasure for us to see students come to the board meetings. It kind of puts a face with some of the decisions that we make here on the board. So thank you very much. We can tell you're all going to be very successful in life, because you can come before this board. At times we can become intimidating, but the millions of people that watch us on TV, Fairfield, you are not afraid whatsoever. So, but thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate it. With that being said, there's no obligation for you to stay for the rest of the meeting. If parents and students, if you want to go, you're more than welcome to leave now, or you can stay for the rest of the meeting. It's up to you, but pretty boring stuff. So thank you very much.
They're recording the call.
And this will be, I think, Mr. Link tries to get it up on TV Fairfield on the Tuesday following the meetings. So look for it there. Thank you all very much. Okay, Mr. Smith?
All right, our next presentation is a Business Advisory Council report. This time I'll turn it over to Ms. Wilda.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Birding and members of the board, in your packet tonight, you have our Business Advisory Council first board report. So we will look at that together. This has been quite an adventure this year. It's a very new process for me and my department from that end of things, but it has definitely been a fruitful adventure and one that we look forward to continuing to evolve as time goes on. I like how you just said that, Mrs. O'Neill, like sometimes we're not always really sure. And this has definitely taken some twists and turns, and I think will continue to grow and evolve, and that's been really enjoyable to be a part of it. As you know, this is the first year. I have a membership list included as well. So you can see there are 9 really outstanding people that I get to work with from that end of things, from business and a few from the district here, from that end, a very nice variety of folks. And as you probably remember, the purpose of the committee from that end of things, in part, is to comply with the Ohio Revised Code that's set out. But when we went about setting this up, Mr. Smith and I had many conversations about how can we really make this group meaningful. That was a big part of it, is I really wanted to be sure that if we're going to get these people together, if we're going to take their time, how do we ensure that the meetings are meaningful, that they're contributing, that we're giving them what they need as well. So the 3 pieces of information you can see on the first page under the purpose of the committee, the Ohio Department of Education charges us with the discussion of 3 things. And those are the 3 bullet points: the delineation of employment skills, changes in the economy, the job market, types of employment, and the 3rd bullet, suggestions for developing the working relationships among business, labor management, and education. So each one of our meetings, that's part of what we discuss as we review those 3 items. Sometimes we don't get to all 3 from that end of things, but over the course of our meetings, we've been able to review those 3 from those business professionals' perspectives. So in general, the goals for our advisory council have been, 1, to provide our information here to the board, which we're doing here, to assist meeting the needs of students, and then other items as appropriate, and you'll see how that's kind of, like I said, evolved. So if you flip over to page 2, we can look at what we've accomplished here in this school year. So far, we've had 3 meetings in September, December, and February. And let's look at those 3 goals set forth by ODE so far. These are summaries of the conversations we've had and what the business professionals think the answers, at least at this moment in time, are, because as we all know, business changes, our economy changes, job markets change. So as of today, here's the summary of what they feel those are. I am not going to read this all to you, but for our public, when we look at the delineation of employment skills, the 3 pieces that they felt are the most important for our kids as we leave our district that we need to instill upon them are critical thinking skills. We need to be sure our kids can really think. They must exhibit responsibility from that end of things. And to be able, they identified professional social skills. So interesting that we just talked about soft skills here in the advisory from that end of things, because that's a big piece of what we've talked about here. When we looked at changes in the economy and job market, this conversation, I think, was very interesting from the stance of these professionals all come to us with solid college educations and backgrounds of that nature, but they very quickly turned to the conversation about they are looking for quality skilled laborers who don't necessarily have to have college degrees. That very quickly became a conversation point at our meetings. And do students know that those are out there? Now, quality was a key word. I'm looking at Mr. Smith because we spent a lot of time on that topic for 2 meetings. The idea, again, of going back and being responsible and being professional, but they have jobs to fill. Mercy Health talked about their jobs. Both the banks and our manufacturing folks talked about that they have jobs going unfilled that need those kind of people. So we did spend a lot of time talking about how do we connect some of our kids who are in need of those jobs, how do we make sure they're up to par and ready to go to get to that. So Butler Tech became a conversation point because we know that they do that well, and how our team wanted to learn more about Butler Tech and what they offer. But then we also talked about, so how do we at Fairfield High School do that kind of work as well. So I'm going to come back to that point in just a second, okay, because that's a really important one. And then the third piece over on page 3, the third charge from ODE, is about suggestions for developing that relationship. So again, two things kind of emerged, and they all fit together and blended together very nicely, was about, is there a way for businesses to share their need with us and us help them? And then secondly, can we somehow give our students that real world possibilities? So hopefully you can see like all this kind of meshes together, like those three big questions. Admittedly, I keep going back to Mrs. O'Neill's comment as she said that. I was kind of like, when I first read those, I'm like, these are just three separate things out here, but they really ended up melding together. So I'm going to put that to the side for just a second. One other thing that I was really impressed with this group of individuals about is they wanted to learn about us. They wanted to learn more about our district because not all of them come from an education background or have students in our district. So at each one of our meetings, it kind of did like we do here at our board meetings, like a spotlight. And so at our very first meeting, we highlighted our ESL program. At our second, we did our music program. Dawn Hildreth came to our first meeting. Jill Wilhelm came to our second. And at our last meeting, Butler Tech. We had a couple representatives from Butler Tech so that they're learning more about what we do in education. So going back to those three conversations, at our last meeting then, we kind of, I think, came to this epiphany as a group. And it was, so how can we, these people actually who are sitting here already giving of their time, how do we make these three things happen? As I said, for the kids at Fairfield High School who maybe are not participating in Butler Tech, how do we help them build those soft skills? How do we help them make these connections? How do we get them ready for some of these jobs? That sort of thing. So our next meeting, which is on March 21st, the group is actually going to meet at Fairfield High School. We had invited Aaron Blankenship from the high school as well as Zach Yates, a school counselor at the high school. They were at our meeting last time. And we are going to connect our business folks with some of our teachers there in the building who we felt made great connections. For example, Lou Silverberg, printing, from Omni Printing. He is going to sit with one of our graphics arts teachers and make a conversation, some of our art teachers, I should say. So how does the art field work into his business and what could we do from that end of things? Are there projects, are there ways that students could help in his business or that type of thing to try to make that real world connection? Liz Main works for Catholic Charities, tons of translation services. She's going to talk to our world language folks. So what kind of connection can we make there? And again, we're talking about, years 3 and 4 students who may or may not realize that there's opportunities out there from that end of things. The last easy connection we made, I think was, I'm trying to remember, there was 3 that jumped on this right away. I think it was Scott Dickerson from Takumi Stamping had some ideas immediately of how he needed a website developed in Takumi. I mean, obviously there'd be a ton of stuff, but he was thinking immediately, like, we just developed a website, so I would be easy to be able to share with kids, here's what we need from that. So they started thinking, which I was very appreciative of, how they directly could impact our kids at our building from that. So that's our next meeting. So that's where we've come so far from where we've been, of a group of strangers kind of coming together to gel, to our next meeting is going to be at the high school so we can meet with teachers and start talking about how we can connect these folks directly with our students. Mr. Smith has been able to attend many of our meetings. Do you want to add anything from that end of things?
I'll just add one thing that we've talked a lot about connections this evening. And one of our meetings, 2 of the individuals that make up the committee and having those conversations around the table discovered that there was a need for them to connect aside from what we were talking about, so they actually connected after the meeting to talk about how they could collaborate. So that was just, so tonight that resonated when we're talking about all these connections, how this is beneficial to all and not just the school district, but also to the other individuals that just sitting around getting to know each other, building relationships, making those connections. And so I thought that was a really neat thing to watch.
I'm glad you brought that up, because at our last meeting, there was another set of business cards exchanged between two of them, same kind of thing, just conversations like, wait a minute, you do what, and I do, can we? And I'm like, but make sure those cards go back and forth across the table, so, yeah, so that's been hopefully beneficial on their end too, from that end of things. So that's where we're at so far, and we will be back next year. You are always welcome from that end of things to join us if you would like. Questions, thoughts?
Thank you. Any questions?
I'd be curious if there is some connection that exists, and we haven't drawn that conclusion yet, about the critical thinking skills, the responsibility, and the professional social skills with what's going on in the advisory groups at the middle school. I mean, it could be going on, but is there a connection that we can say, you know, what you're doing in advisory, look, this is going to pay off because listen to what our business leaders are saying, or letting the business leaders know that something may be going on in our advisory groups. It sounds like there are some things going on, maybe not so much professional social skills, but social skills. And you know, I'm not sure what professional social skills are. Are there unprofessional social skills? Or is it workplace social skills? So, you know, it'd be interesting, you know, if you had a conversation with the two principals and you know, just ask, you know, is there some kind of connection that exists that we just haven't drawn the lines to them yet? You know, we don't do things in isolation, and there's so many things going on. And there are probably other places in the district that this is going on. You know, it could be going on at the freshman building as well as the high school.
Any other questions or comments?
Oh, I think this is awesome. It's a great idea to connect what's happening at the school, opportunities to just expand, just to make sure that our kids are getting those skills that are needed to get into the workforce. With Catholic charities, I mean, that's like a really obvious thing that I never thought about. You know, interpreters, the need for that, and this is fantastic. This is really, it's just a smart thing to do, so thank you guys for participating in it and bringing it to us.
Yeah, well done. Thank you very much.
I just had another thought.
I'll take it.
You know, for people in the education business, we understand the school funding issues. What about the business community? Could they look at our 5-year forecast and answer some of the basic questions? And maybe they would have some comments that might help us in the business end of it, from the standpoint that here's the parameters that we have to work under and the constraints that we work under. And, you know, what do you think? And the reason I say that is the more that the key people of the community understand the 5-year forecast, the better we have of them understanding the restraints that we operate under. I mean, everything has a price, and so if we do this, maybe we can't do that. And so as we schedule our priorities based on finances, you know, this is why we are where we're at the moment. And
Good idea.
someday, if we have to go back to the voters, we would have some people that would understand this and could possibly be advocates for us. Or be advocates with the state legislature.
Right.
You know, I think one of the biggest topics that we need to approach is the unfunded mandates. And I'm sure they have unfunded mandates with HIPAA laws and some of the other things that they have to deal with. And so maybe if we could come to agreement on some common ground on unfunded mandates, that we could exert some influence there to get, you know, I think one of the things that we're going to have to wrestle with is what's going to happen with the gasoline tax and the diesel tax.
Right.
Smart that we probably use gasoline engines and not diesel engines. Because the diesel engine tax is going up 20 cents. So,
Thank you, Mr. Hare. Thank you.
if I think of anything else, Lanny, I'll send it to
Absolutely,
you.
please do.
All right, our next presentation is baseball and softball facility improvement. I'll turn it over to Mr. Penny.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Birding, members of the board, I'm back for another inning of baseball discussion. Tonight, actually, I'm bringing back information that was requested back in September from a presentation at a work session. And initially, I'll be discussing what came back through from the boosters as far as feedback, and then through the athletic director, Mark Harden. And then I'll be talking about different, make sure this is on. I'll be talking about different options moving forward for consideration. So you've seen this slide a few times, and I just wanted to make sure, or go ahead and reframe everything regarding the grounds at Creekside. We have 33 acres at Creekside. It is in a 100 to 500 year floodplain. Primary baseball and softball fields at this point, as well as our JV fields, and auxiliary green space used as practice fields. So, moving on to baseball, softball, concessions, and press boxes. From the athletic director department, as well as athletic boosters and feedback regarding that, the boosters stated that they believe restrooms are definitely needed. That's something they would love to see. They would like the concession stand to stay in their current location. And the primary reason from the feedback that we saw was so they could actually watch the athletic events as they were going on. Because primarily the people that are working those events are the parents of the players that are on the field. And that's due to scheduling and some other things that other sports can do some rotations, but when it comes to baseball and softball scheduling, it doesn't fit as well for those type of rotations. And Mr. Harden could speak more to that if there's any additional questions when there's discussion. Current buildings, they would love to see an aesthetic update to them, and that makes perfect sense to us. Electrical as well as water upgrades would be welcomed. As I mentioned back in September, this year they will have no potable water or drinkable water within those facilities. We worked with the city as far as looking at what we had regarding that, and then also not just the water coming in, but all the wastewater going out. So we disconnected that service at this point. Storage at this point is not an issue. That's what they communicated back. They have a $9,000 storage barn that was built a few years back. And they said that that's not something that they feel is a major issue for them at this point. In regards to the things that I've mentioned, the athletic director fully supported, what the recommendations were, or at least the discussion that came out of the booster group. If you'd like, I can pause, and there could be discussion regarding this portion of things before I move on to possible improvements, or I can continue on with the possible improvements.
Any questions? Just one answer now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, one thing that we're looking at is whether we end up building a new facility for even concessions, restrooms, storage, or not, these current concession stands are press boxes also. So unless we decide to deviate from using them as press boxes and go with something else, we would need to do aesthetic upgrades to these buildings. And what we've included here, we went out and sought pricing to figure out what the cost would be to do the upgrades so they would be aesthetically pleasing and fit with what the upgrades we're doing with the facility. These things include serving windows or doors. Now, if we ended up building a storage building, then we'd end up doing something different with that, and we'd end up blocking in those doors. So it's variable on that. Roofing, flashing, siding, spouting, paint, electrical upgrades, miscellaneous materials. and we have those projected around $13,500. Now, there's some work that we're going to do in-house. So that number is a little bit flexible. That's a budgetary number. So on the softball side, on the side of things, very similar number, very similar upgrades. So we know we can definitely spruce up aesthetically the outside of those buildings. Now, at the bottom of the presentation slide, you'll notice it says potable water, the drinkable water, and wastewater. I don't have those included in the prices up top. It's been communicated to me that it would be welcomed if we had those options within the actual concession stands that we currently have, but the primary goods that they serve out of the concession stands are dry goods. With that being said, I do have a number, and we're looking at approximately $50,000 plus as a budgetary number. The primary cost is actually getting the wastewater across the creek and putting a pump station in. So the wastewater component and hooking up to the actual sanitary sewers is the majority of that cost. And then having new PVC ran out there, from a technical standpoint, there's old Blue Max PVC underground right now, which is something that we would need to run all new PVC out there for the drinking water to both of those stands. And the restroom facility concession, or whatever's decided on that front if we build a building. We'd also need to put in backflow preventers on the water side of things. So the budgetary number, which we feel pretty confident with, is $50,000 plus, give or take.
Sorry, Mr. Petty, is that per building or just total?
No, that would be total.
Okay, thank you.
So this slide, one thing you'll notice is it's a picture of our current concession stand restrooms at our football stadium. One of the things that was mentioned by the board at the September meeting was, what could our stadium or could our facilities at the baseball softball field look like at its best? Well, what we have at our football field is beautiful, and it's wonderful, and it serves our people extremely well. So we sought to translate the success we had over there into what we would have potentially at a baseball softball field. So one thing you'll notice with the picture on the left, and as the captions say under it about that, it'd be similar, whatever we would potentially build if you were interested in doing so, would have same materials, color, structure, and so forth. Now, in September, and I'll get to the pricing on this in a moment, it's in further slide, or future slides. In September, there's a presentation with 2 different buildings on there. Both of those buildings that were presented in September were of a lower monetary value. The budgetary number was not as aggressive as the number for the building that you see on this page, or a similar building. But that's because it was not of the same quality as what you see on this page. So I'll be talking about that here in a moment. To the right, it's a kind of a muddled picture. There's a lot going on in this picture, but I wanted to, I thought it was the best representation of our possibilities. And I'll go to the next slide where it has the actual Google map or Google Earth view of the softball and JV softball field, as well as the land where potentially this restroom, concession restroom storage building may go. And the reason why the picture on the right side is powerful is this is a site plan that was developed by an engineer for our ramps and our ADA access. And it just so happened that it extended out far enough to be able to show us a little bit about what's underground. Because we don't have x-ray vision, obviously. We sometimes don't know what's shooting through in different areas. And if you look, like I said, there's a lot going on that graphic. But the things that are in color, the red writing, the green boxes, those are things I would like you to focus in on. And you can see you have the walking path that's going in right now that's connecting the current walking path to our bridge ramp. But you see a storm sewer that's going from Creekside through the creek, and it empties into the creek. You have a sanitary sewer that goes from left to right, and that's going from the softball field, and then it's continuing on through. And then you'll notice that between the creek and the new walking path to get to the bridge, there's a sanitary sewer there also. We cannot build on those sanitary sewers, or on the sanitary sewers, nor can we build on the storm sewer. Okay, so we have to look at a bigger picture on where could we put these potential upgrades. And one of the things that we've considered is putting them where the green boxes are, which is building location option. And then there's also a secondary option. And I would have loved, at least at this point with the drawings that we have in future slides, just for, let's say, the restroom, because that would be our smallest facility. But I would have loved for that to be able to fit in between the sanitary sewer and the walking path, or the storm sewer and the walking path, and kind of jigsaw that with that puzzle around. But the fact of the matter is, it's a little too large. And then also, we'd have to talk to people about getting building permits and zoning, well, not zoning as much, but building permits, and do a more formal site survey on that site, most likely, to get those permits. And as far as how close we can have it to those actual sanitary, the sanitary sewer as well as the storm sewer, that would be decided at that point. So we could put a building, for instance, to the right where it says building location option, but we also have to consider the field that is on the left-hand picture. That's the JV softball field. And as we get into that space, you know, hits that are coming off the bats there towards that building. The softball field, for example, is around 200 feet to the fence, 190 feet from home plate to the fence. Where that building is sitting, the darker green square, when I did a Google map, like a measuring tool, it appeared that it would be around 270 feet, 260 feet, somewhere around in there. So it would appear that we were safe as long as they didn't really get a hold of the ball as far as something hitting the building. But that's an option. We were trying to think outside the box, and another possible location is right behind the right field softball. And it really depends on if it's a storage building, storage and concession, or if it's a restroom. Obviously, the restroom is going to be the smaller of the options. But putting it right next to the right field fence for softball, raising that fence in that area, and then going ahead and extending the walking path out around. So that was another option that we had thought about. And anything that there is potentially even third options, or more option, but a third option may be to continue it on down the way and then continue the path. Without having a bigger site survey, it's hard to tell what we have there. And we're also getting closer to the creek, which is a more aggressive flood zone. So those are just things that have to be considered as we look at these things. Before I move on to this section, is there any questions in regards to this slide?
I guess my only question is, anything discussed here impact play, the field of play?
No, like Joe said, our biggest concern was that JV field, how, what a, for lack of a better term, a home run would look like out there. It would be almost impossible for someone to hit a ball out there 270 feet. Another thing we could do, if we thought, we've never put a snow fence out there, or a temporary fence out there, but you could also do that as well. Instead of it, say 220, 230, where even a ball that carried that 200 feet would not reach that area. That's something we could do as well for public ability, but we feel pretty good that at least that 270 we're in good shape.
Is that typical for like a JV field to not have any fencing?
It is. It just depends on where you go. But yeah, typically, sometimes in some places we go to league varsity JV field aren't even together. It might be varsity would be right there at the high school, JV might even play at a park somewhere close. It's rare. We're lucky to have them all kind of there together, but it's not uncommon at all.
And some of that spacing will depend on how close we can get to the actual storm sewer, sanitary sewer. But like Mark said, we feel fairly confident that that's going to be out of range. But it depends on what type of building that, if we decide to move it forward with any building, what type of building that would be. And as you'll see with the prints or I guess, plans that you have, that you'll see in future slides, that, you know, obviously the storage, concession, and restroom building together, it's a lot larger. We're looking at about a 60-foot building. So, is there any questions on this section at this point? Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. And what you'll see is, you'll see some floor plans, and then you'll see estimated costs. Okay, these are budgetary numbers. At this point, we haven't actually had architects draw up specs or anything like that to give us a definitive cost, but these are solid budgetary estimates on what we'd be looking at if we went out for bid for these buildings to be constructed, similarly to what we have at the football field. Okay, so the first one I have is a restroom. And I'm gonna go ahead and click through these and just talk. And if you'd like, we can go back at any time, or I can slow down. So please feel free to stop me.
I guess,
Yes.
when we're talking about utilities, is that water and sewer, electric?
Yes. Water and sewer, electric. And then also, on a future slide, there's a storage building. And then if we're gonna have a heat source in there for that storage building. So even the restrooms here have a small section for custodial materials, things like that. So, and then the plumbing chase and so forth. All of these designs are ADA accessible to make sure there's enough space for people to move around within the building also. Let's move to the next slide. We have a concession restroom combo building. So we have the estimated costs, and then construction document, site survey, and then the site prep, which a true site survey for this project would have to be completed to be able to know the exact site preps.
And this is just one building on the softball side.
Yes. And then we have concession restroom and storage building, which like we were talking about, fairly large building, 60 feet by 25. And you'll notice, and on the concession version, the last slide, it has the same thing. But in front of the concession stand, it'll have a canopy over it, and it'll be built out. Also, these buildings, just like the building that's at the field, or at the football stadium, they're hipped roofs. They're very high-quality buildings, just like what we have at the football stadium or the Fairfield Stadium. And then the final variation that I have here is a restroom storage building. And the cost for that, construction documents, and then site prep. And I have a composite slide here that kind of puts everything together. So that way you could visually see what we're looking at from a budgetary standpoint if we were to go out to bid to have this done by a contractor. And then potential steps moving forward. If there's any further discussion that we'd like to have, that'd be great.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, I heard you say that currently the boosters don't feel they need concession square footage? I'm sorry, storage square footage?
That was the feedback that was received.
And I also heard you say that they prefer to have the concessions where they are so that they can actually view the games, the concessions related to, I guess, the baseball fields?
Baseball and softball, yes.
So then if we build a concession slash restroom slash storage building, we really haven't met the needs of the people that we're building it for.
Based on that feedback, Mr. Harden may be able to speak more in depth to what the boosters had to say, but that's the feedback that was received.
Feels like a lot of money for not a home run, so to speak, across the board.
And if I could say, again, it's been a while, I think Joe mentioned September. There was a I feel as though we had actually multiple conversations about these facilities. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of question. As Joe referenced this evening, there was a question about what would this facility look like at its best. And so as a result, we shared that at some point in time, we would come back with a full menu of items, so to speak, to answer that question. You know, what if we had this? What if we had that? So that is why you are seeing all of these options, because we shared that we would come back with those options for the board to view. In the meantime, Joe and Mark have worked to get the feedback of, you know, the folks that work there and who spend a lot of time there to get their perspectives as well. You know, at one point, there was even discussion about building a new baseball and softball varsity facility altogether on the far end, with a concession stand restroom area there where, you know, you might call that the Field of Dreams, where you have all of those, you have your concession and restrooms between the two fields so that it can serve both of them. You have press boxes, it's all right there in one place. You know, you can watch 2 games at one time, so on and so forth. So, you know, that was even discussed way back when. That's why, you know, something to consider for the board is that if that happens down the line, you know, would you really want to put a concession stand and restroom on this end when someday, even though there are no plans in place, you might have, like I said, that what some might call the Field of Dreams, where you have 2 varsity fields next to each other, serviced by restrooms and concession and press boxes between the 2 fields. So, so that is why you were seeing all of these options this evening, simply because at some point in time, those were all discussed, and Joe said that he would come back to the board with those options. So we are just simply putting that in front of you so that you can see those options and know what the costs are, and giving you the feedback from the stakeholders.
My recollection was that the current varsity baseball field and the current varsity softball field are long-term facilities that we're going to use. And say if we did build new baseball and softball fields in the future, those 2 fields that I just mentioned are still in the picture. You know, for JV softball, you get a much better facility because you don't have that little skin diamond and without bleachers and without dugouts and stuff. And where would our JV play or our freshmen play? Well, they could play on the current varsity field when, you know, so looking at that, I think we at least need to address the restroom issue with the current softball and baseball field. Now, people sometimes have short memories, but, you know, if we went ahead and built the restrooms, I could hear people say, well, who made that decision not to put a concession stand in there? Or who made the decision not to put storage in there? Well, guess what? That was based on feedback from people. Just like we heard, what's this K-5 plan you're talking about? Your 6, 7, and 8 middle schools, and you know, where did that come from? Well, that came from a facility plan that we'd gotten feedback from the community, and that board had agreed that that's the direction that we need to go in, and you know, it took us a number of years to get there, but we got there. So I would say with those 2 fields being in our future, you know, my question is, why wouldn't we do something with restrooms? Now, you know, if they're just selling dry goods, do they need a concession stand other than what they've got? No, I don't think so. So, maybe the best bet is to consider just addressing the restroom facility issue and move on. And, if we need storage later down the road, well, we had that option, and that was not one that we selected. And I say we because the board makes the ultimate decision, but we did seek input from the current boosters and coaches that are here now. And so today, that may not be such a good idea, so be it. So, I'm interested in pursuing the restroom thing. Because I think that's, I just think that it's inadequate for what we've got over there right now.
And at least from what I heard, and I don't mean to keep referencing Mr. Harden, but he'll have more of the nitty-gritty detail if that's what you need from it. They are selling dry goods and so forth. They would welcome the opportunity, obviously, for the water. It's just not something that, from the athletic department and overall standpoint, that is a necessity. But I want to make sure that I don't miscommunicate anything to the board or misrepresent at least what my understanding is from them.
Well, and I go back to the fact that we haven't even addressed the playing surface yet. I know our people who are working at making the infield at the varsity field playable, but we still got the issue with the grass and the upkeep on that. And is that, that's not a today decision, that's going to be a tomorrow down the road decision of what we do with that.
Well, Mr. Hare, the cost for an infield, I guess softball is not interested in turf. For an actual turf infield at the baseball field with a concrete nailer, it's $275,000.
Right.
So that would be the cost if we decided to proceed with something like that.
Right. So, well, my thoughts are at least the immediate issue is, and I'm not putting the time on immediate, like tomorrow or whatever. Obviously, we're not going to do anything for this season, I wouldn't expect. But, the next phase, whatever you would come back as a reasonable timeline would be the restrooms, and I'm only one board member, so.
Sure.
I do have a question. Thank you, Michael. Okay, bear with me on this. Have we hosted any tournaments with this? Would improvements put us in a position to host tournaments? Would there be a return on investment if we looked at a bigger plan? Is there any information on that? Are there things that we should consider that might put us in a position where we possibly want to make a greater investment for greater yield in the future?
I can answer that a little bit. As far as tournaments that we host now, baseball and softball is set up sort of uniquely in that first two rounds of the state tournament are held at your home facility. So often when our teams are good enough, we already host first and second round games there. We hosted sectional finals and district finals and even some regionals in my 10 years there. So the state is aware of we do have a really good facility now for it, especially softball has often been out there. I think we're hosting a district game this year as well. As far as bigger tournaments or bigger things, certainly I think looking forward, I think regionals is probably where that would stop from an OHSAA standpoint. We've already gotten some of those things. There are better facilities out there, obviously, and as Mr. Smith talked about, maybe in a Field of Dreams scenario, we could probably attract more of those things. I do think that one of the misconceptions, though, about the returns on those, literally all you really ever get when you host any of those OHSAA events is concessions. That's it. Most of those monies go directly to the OHSAA, the Southwest District Board. They're really sort of, anytime we host anything of that, basketball, volleyball, soccer, we've done them all since I've been here. It sounds right, but it's more of a service of your high school, sort of serving the Southwest District Board, OHSAA. They're not large money makers. Would there be opportunities for summer? Probably. but I'll be truthful with you. We're careful about renting to outside facilities in the summer simply because just the oversight of it, upkeep. A lot of times that's when we're making improvements and doing different things. But as far as like financial gains from that, there really aren't any other than your boosters making money on concessions, to be truthful. And I want to share one of the other reasons that we didn't sort of talk about why the boosters like where it's at now, besides the fact that they can watch while they work. The baseball schedule, as you guys know, just look outside, we're supposed to play out here in a week. This is going to call snow day tomorrow morning. So, the truth is, the baseball schedule is so fluid. And so to have an outside group say, yes, we commit to this schedule, that schedule you're committing to is never going to look like that. It's not. So to say we committed to Tuesday night, that Tuesday becomes a Wednesday, and all of a sudden you're scrambling. That's why it's always been best for baseball and softball to handle their own. The financial gain for even those outside groups isn't even much of an incentive. The other feedback we both got is if you have sort of that common concession stand there, instead of both groups walking, now they walk a short distance to get, let's say, a lollipop, a pop, most of it was a hot dog. Now both groups are walking to they're just sort of walking away from the game, missing some where they can just go right there. That was just some of the feedback they got as well. That helped.
Yep, thank you.
I appreciate all these options. It's so great to have it all laid out in front of you, and I appreciate the feedback from the parents and the boosters. I would be in favor of the restroom as well. I feel like the parents have said that they don't need the storage unit at this moment, and as a parent myself, like I know the main part is seeing your kid perform or seeing your kid play or seeing your kid hit that ball, and so I would hate to take them away from where the concession is right now and for them to miss that time that you can't get back. Or even just the idea, like you said, of it just doesn't, to me, the concession somewhere else kind of doesn't make sense. And I don't think the storage is needed at the moment. I would be in favor of the upgrades, the upgrades to the current facilities, the current concession facilities. I would be in favor of that. And the addition of the restroom. But the other options I don't think make sense for right now, in my opinion.
Any other comments or questions? So what are our next steps, Mr. Smith, with this?
Well, I think for me, we're having this discussion without our treasurer here.
Right.
So, I know what Nancy would probably say. She'd say, well, that's going to come out of the general fund, and here's how it would impact the general fund. But, I don't want to make any commitments without our treasurer being a part of that decision. So I'm not prepared to make a decision tonight, but
Yeah, I agree.
that's where my thoughts are.
Yeah.
That's where my thoughts are. Let's ask Nancy for her opinion.
And so would you and Mrs. Lane get together with the athletic director and make a recommendation to the board? Is that what you foresee?
So I think we wanted to get your input to see, which we did get your input this evening, but we can certainly wait until Mrs. Lane is here to allow her to speak to the financial impact that this would make. I did, knowing that she wouldn't be here this evening, didn't have a very detailed conversation, but did inquire about, because I figured that one of you might ask that question about the impact on the forecast. And I think there are some monies set aside in the forecast for this work, but I don't know what the exact dollar amount is. So we can have some additional conversation in our next meeting. She can speak to that, and that's one of those things we again want to hear from the board what your input is, which I think we have received that this evening, and then Mr. Penny would move forward with that process in terms of bidding or whatever he needs to do next.
Well, you don't want to do anything to disrupt the current season, I would assume. And so, any recommendation that would come back to the board would have some timelines on it. From the standpoint that, shoot, right now we're under a crunch of just being able to open up.
Right.
I've seen the renovation parts of what's gone on, and they're great. You know, the stands are there, the net's up, but there's still work to be done, and the weather's impacting that negatively, so.
If I may, one of the things that we are interested in doing, as long as we can have your blessing in doing so, is the aesthetic improvements to the current buildings. At minimal, as we're getting into the season, and it's very difficult to paint under these conditions, but we like to put some paint on the building no matter what. But if the board feel comfortable, if you want to wait until a following meeting, that would be fine also. But to potentially give a thumbs up to those aesthetic improvements on that building. I just don't want anyone to be surprised if they go out and they see paint on the building, it's repainted. The paint's not going to be a large fiscal cost, but it's a major aesthetic improvement that will probably take place during the season if we can possibly do it. We could hold off on any other aesthetic improvements to those buildings, or we could go ahead and move forward. I'm not talking about the wastewater or the potable water and the water part of it. I think that's something that, you know, unless you say otherwise, you'd like further time to consider because of the dollar amount on it. But like I said, I've always told you from my end, I'll be as transparent as I can be with what I know, and I don't want anyone to be surprised if the buildings have paint on them.
Well, I'm not a weather forecaster, but I'd be willing to bet in the next 3 weeks, you're not going to be able to paint. So
You're probably correct.
You could come back in 2 weeks or 4 weeks and say, look, if we're going to paint this season, this is the plan. If we're not going to paint this season, it would be done. I mean, you propose and we'll dispose.
Sure. I can hold off and have our maintenance team hold off on doing that. We were going to try to fit it in if the temperature did get up.
If it does get nice, I hate to like lose a nice day, but.
We can hold.
What are your thoughts about?
I'm fine with doing the painting, especially if it's an upgrade to the current facilities.
I think it's also preventive maintenance.
Yeah.
Coat of paint never hurts, you know. I wouldn't want to get $26,000 into it without having a discussion with our treasurer about that, but
yes,
I feel, in my opinion, if the weather is nice enough to throw a coat of paint on the outside of the building, that I'm okay with doing that. I don't think that's a lot of money to spend.
I agree.
Okay. We'll do our best, and like Mr. Harris said, there's a really good chance that it won't happen before, and anyway, but we'll do our best.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Penny.
You're welcome.
All right, our last presentation, the Fairfield Alumni Stadium update. I'll turn it over to Mr. Harden.
Good evening, Mr. Birding, members of the board. Appreciate you letting me come share where we're at with the Alumni Stadium naming rights project. And again, I totally apologize for the way I sound today too, and I'm going to hope that my nose doesn't run too bad here. First, but let me backtrack a little bit. Mr. Harris said something about it. I just want to thank this board for what they allowed us to do at baseball and softball already. Again, I always like to remind ourselves, and myself especially, that we're in the kid business, and I cannot tell you the feedback we've gotten from the baseball players, the softball players, and coaches who go out there, and they're blown away. They're blown away, and I think if you've seen some of the tweets and pictures that the coaches and kids have said just when they walk out there, it's just a completely different atmosphere, and just that walk across the bridge, especially to not walk in mud and to be able to get to stands, it's beautiful, and we're really excited if and when spring ever comes. So I appreciate, again, want to just reiterate my thanks for you all allowing us to do that. My presentation tonight is very short. I just wanted to give you guys an update on where we're at with the Alumni Stadium naming rights project. Just want to recap a little bit of what we did at our last presentation as far as some of the work that was done. And again, I don't want to go too far without thanking some folks who aren't here tonight but have been instrumental in helping me do that. Mr. Randy Hambrick, Sean Shanklin, my secretary, Miss Lori Payne, and Rodney Hubbard is another, and through their Champions Foundation, it's been a great help as well. We sort of re-kicked this back off about a year ago, back in February of last year, to meet with the current donors, which was we were able to have about 20 folks over at the field house to sort of re-kick this back going for the next year. We collected new names at the time, contacts, and just looked at some ways that we could sort of bring this to a close. We created a new Facebook page where we were tracking the progress of new names to sort of draw attention to the project and sort of create some positive peer pressure, which has been effective. We worked with our Alumni Association. While they were still up and functioning, they shared their database with us. Especially one of the things that was very helpful, and I'll get to that in a moment, they shared all the class contacts with us as they have reunions each year, and those folks that were kind of in charge and kind of connected with the alumni group. One cool little thing we did this year, if you were at the football game at homecoming, we had the class of 1968 come for their reunion, and some of those folks had heard about the project, and I came in and met with a couple of their leaders. They asked if they could help in a small way. They said that some of them had already donated to the project individually, but they wanted to see what they could do. So they literally did nothing more than at their reunion that night set out some of our flyers, and they took some of the flyers, but they literally just collected money and collected that night just about almost $400 and just gave that right to us to go toward the project. That's one of the reasons here in a moment you're going to see some odd numbers. I don't know if there's pennies and nickels and things in there, but it was pretty cool that they just literally just came up. Many of those folks came from out of town and were able to make a donation to the project as well. In November of this past November, we worked with Rodney Hubbard and Jamie McBee and a lot of the folks with the Fairfield Champions Foundation. One of the things they allowed us to do on that night was they said that they would match funds up to $2,000. So they would donate $500 per 4 people. If 4 people would step up that night, and they would match their $500 donation to make a full $1,000 donation. We were able to get 4 people to do that night, so that was $4,000 more that we were able to do just at the Hall of Fame banquet in November. As you remember, when I was here around that time in the winter, I had told you that we had set up, Nancy and I had set up a way to do payroll deduction for FCSD employees, and we did have a few people take advantage of that and are still taking advantage of that through the end of this year. Most importantly, and why I was kind of here tonight, it was really the will of the board, and I think it's been a positive. I think you'll see is that we need to establish an end date for the project, and we did. We set November 30th of last year for donations to sort of be stopped. To sort of, again, put some folks' feet to the fire, and I think that was effective. That being said, knowing that we're not presenting, obviously, till today, just because we stopped that project in November, and we did. We had told and we communicated with the folks who had already donated that that's what we were doing. I mean, I was literally having meetings, phone conversations, and folks last week, letting them know that we were going to be presenting tonight. If they were still interested in the project, because obviously we were checking back with folks who had at least a preliminary interest. That being said, I want to tell you where we're at. At the end of March of 2 years ago, we were at 38,000. Like I said, in March of a year later, it had slowed quite a bit, and we were at 42,000. I'm proud to say that in just the last year, we've gone up almost 40-50% and sit right today at 61,313. Since that last March meeting, we've had 16 new commitments. I do think that the board was wise in telling us, or kind of giving us the idea, or not the idea, but certainly the impetus to sort of put an end date on it. And I think what that has allowed me to do as well, there were a lot of folks that were in on this at the very beginning. I mean, that when you see that March 2017 number of 38,000, we were able to do that really within a matter of 5 or 6 months. That was a quick 38,000. There was a lot of momentum, and like any of these things go, there's like a it's tough to keep that momentum going. But I do think a year ago when we had that meeting, we were able to sort of kickstart it again, and it's been a really positive thing to see almost $20,000 be raised since last year. I guess what I'm here to do tonight is to come back with the board as they'd asked me to do with an update, and if we could, to ask for the board to consider. We know that it is the board that is the one who authorizes us to name or rename any building after anyone or anything. So what we're asking the board to consider tonight is to honor these folks' commitment and their donations, and to consider renaming Fairfield Stadium Fairfield Alumni Stadium. If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to ask them or answer them.
Yes.
I won't ask any.
I would just add, so this, even though it's in the presentation portion of your meeting, it's like an item for board discussion, so wanted to give the board the opportunity, again, another topic that we've discussed at some point in the past, but it has been a while. But the board expressed some opinions about putting an end date on this fundraiser. We put that in place. You can see what has been raised since that those last conversations that we had. So we wanted to bring this before the board this evening, give you an opportunity to hear the presentation, and also give you an opportunity to provide some input prior to moving forward at a later date with the renaming of the stadium.
Questions?
Yes. The figures that you gave us, are those pledges and donations?
Those are pledges and donations, and I literally looked today. We're literally within $400 or $500 of each. So that number that we've actually collected is only about $400 or $500 less than that, and those are folks that are still doing payroll deduction through the end of the year.
Because sometimes people pledge, and
Yeah,
it takes
no.
a while for them to come up with
No,
the
we're
cash.
literally, that's a good question. I should have brought that number is literally $400 less than that. It's just finishing up payroll deduction through the end of this fiscal year.
As far as I'm concerned, when's the date?
Right.
You tell us, you're the athletic director, you know when this ought to fall at an appropriate time. So-
Yeah, I think what I would love to do is just at one of the next, as close as board meetings, is kind of bring it to you formally, let you vote on it. And what I would like to do at that time when we do that is to sort of share with, again, I know one of the things that has been asked in the past is kind of what are we doing with those monies? How are we recognizing those donors? And I know we've done this in the past, so I didn't want to layer a lot of details on you, but if you are at the field house, you can see that there was I've shown you guys kind of what that would look like as far as what that plaque would look like, and we would basically use some of the money to sort of replicate the entrance that sits behind Central, do that at the other end as well, and there will be plaques at both ends to sort of recognize all those donors that you guys have seen in the past. So that would be my recommendation.
And this would be ready for the first home football game?
Yes, I've talked with Gary Hart, who kind of helped with the last project, and he's pretty confident, or we're pretty confident we can be done with this during the summer pretty easily. It's really just adding a little bit of signage and one small outbuilding ticket booth that would allow us to do it. So it'd be pretty easy.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great.
Great.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you
guys.
very much.
Take care.